Welcome back to the Morph Your Mind podcast. I'm your host, Justin Wright. My co-host, Chrissy Barron, will be joining us here in a little bit. And before we get started, I want to thank, as always, our title sponsor, Nova 3 Labs. You can use the discount code podcast15 at NOVA, the number 3, LABS.com to save yourself some dough. Let's be honest, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably take supplements of some kind. Why not make sure that you're taking the best available on the market, whether it's improving your sleep, whether it's helping your focus, whether it's recovering from workouts? They have you covered. Use that code, save yourself some cash. So this week, we're going to get into an important topic in the modern world, and that is the topic of deep work or uninterrupted bouts of creative work. That's the only way that we're going to be able to fully express our creativity and fully create something that can be considered masterful or that can be an expression of our mastery. And in the modern age, this is incredibly important because of the frequency of interruptions that we deal with on a regular basis and the fact that we're so interconnected. And we just recently talked about how this can affect our interpersonal relationships. But I want you to also understand that it can dramatically affect your work output and your ability to actually produce what we call deep work. So let's first define that, and we'll define where the concept comes from. So there is a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, and he goes into this concept where some of the best creations, inventions, works of art, books, whatever you want to call it, films even, have been spawned from long bouts of uninterrupted work. And he also goes a step further to say that we can actually work fewer total hours if we ensure that a good portion of the time that we do spend working is done in this, what he defines as a state of deep work. And in order to facilitate this, we need to create an environment that actually helps us embrace this concept. We need to be able to eliminate distractions, and we need to be able to set ourselves up so that we can actually lean into this time and embrace this concept. And so in a little bit, we're going to actually talk about strategies for doing that. But I like bringing in weird quotes or quotes from people who you may not necessarily think would apply to these topics. And so I'm going to start here with a quote that you may have seen kicking around on Instagram or on the internet from Dr. Dre. And he said, "I've gone 79 hours without sleep creating. When that flow is going, it's almost like a high. You don't want it to stop. You don't want to go to sleep for fear of missing something." And this essentially encapsulates what deep work is to an absolute extreme, where he's gone through these creative episodes where he doesn't want to wind down, he doesn't want to step away. He's so focused and in what we refer to as a flow state, where he's optimizing at his highest levels, he's producing at the highest possible level that he can, and he's actually going through that creative process. And I start with that quote because I want you to understand that any type of deep work or anything where we're creating something that is worthwhile or meaningful requires us to go through that creative process. And the only way to access that is to create a state in which we are not distracted by other things going on around us. And they've actually done studies to show what happens when we are working on task A intently and we switch temporarily to task B and back to task A. So there are multiple studies that have proven that multitasking in that way is actually highly ineffective. And in order to produce the highest quantity of work, we actually want to focus on one thing at a time, finish that thing, move on to the next. We've talked about that a little bit in our high priority target theory, where we lay out things or the highest priority targets that we want to attack for that day so that we can focus our energy and our efforts on chipping away at the most important and most critical tasks that we have in front of us. But I want you to understand that by switching your focus, even temporarily, when you go back to that original thing that you were working on or that original piece of work that you were spending time going through, you are actually less effective once you return to that activity. So Cal Newport goes through this topic or through these studies a little bit in his book, but they've done actual research. They've shown that there is diminishing returns. There is a fall off of productivity when we shift our focus from A to B and back to A. So sometimes we feel like, oh, I've earned a break, or I've hit a sticking point, let me work on this other thing and come back. But on a lot of times, especially with creative processes or when we're trying to build something or write a novel or create a screenplay or do something that requires that intensive focus, if we shift away and come back, we actually lose productivity. And so understanding that is incredibly important. If you become distracted by anything, even small, it can be temporary. It doesn't need to be a significant amount of time. Even if the distraction is mere seconds, just that shift of focus and that shift back is enough to actually hamstring you on that activity and actually reduce your productivity, reduce your ability to create. And that's any distraction. And now I want you to take a step back and think about the modern world and think about the age we live in. Everything around us is a distraction. Not only are our phones buzzing, but now we have watches that connect to our phones. So if you happen to miss a notification on your phone, don't worry, your wrist will buzz too. And now you'll look at that and look away from what you're doing. And so all of those little distractions, right, in the modern office landscape, this open concept office is all the rage with a lot of Silicon Valley startups and a lot of big tech companies. They want the floor open. They want to facilitate discussion. But what they've actually found happens is that discussion is reduced and distractions are increased. So people are constantly in this state of distraction and they're unable to tap into that state of deep work where they can actually focus creatively and build something. And now, even if we're talking about tech companies where we're trying to solve the world's problems through technology, they're trying to build software and build systems that can actually do these things. That requires long stretches of uninterrupted work. So now that we understand the importance and we understand how detrimental distractions are, what can we actually do to facilitate deep work? What can we do to create patches of time in our life where we can experience this, where we can go through this process, and where we can tap into our creative potential? Because this won't help you unless you understand how to actually access that time and that state. And so the first thing is there's a great article about how to set up your phone to work for you and not against you. And I'm actually going to put the link to that article in the description of this podcast. And for those of you watching the YouTube version, I'll put it right in the description of the video. But this article is a great read. It's not something that's meant to be read top to bottom in one sitting, but it's a series of strategies that get progressively more involved for creating less distraction from our phones, especially if you use your phone for work or it's something that you need to use in your job. Reducing the number of distractions is going to help you access that deep work state. And so it goes through things like turning off notifications from unimportant programs, essentially getting rid of that little, the bubble with the number of notifications that you have on most apps so that you don't know what you're missing or you're not tempted to look. It's putting things in folders, deep into folders, so you have to intentionally look for the apps that you want to use. And so it brings you through a series of these steps and these processes. And now that's assuming that you need your phone nearby when you're working. But I want to take this a step further. If you want to truly create a situation where you can enter a state of deep work, you're going to want to put your phone away entirely. Turn on Do Not Disturb or turn off notifications, tuck it in a drawer, tuck it out of sight. You don't even want to be tempted by it or tempted to look away. And now once we have that digital distraction away, and this goes for those of you with smart watches where you're getting notifications, turn off the notifications or put that watch away. Where a classic watch, you can use just a regular alarm clock to keep track of time or a wall clock if you need to. From there, especially if you're doing work on your computer, make sure there are apps and websites available that you can actually reduce your ability to use the internet. You can cut down on your connectivity while you're working through something. So if you use your computer or your laptop to write, for example, you can reduce your ability to access the web or access other applications or programs, and that can be very helpful. And then from there, we have to look at our physical environment. If you just try to get work done in a crowded office, for example, there are distractions all over. People are going to talk to you. You can't really remove yourself from that dynamic without being rude or without being off-putting to your coworkers, and that can oftentimes cause a slew of other problems. So we need to find a secluded space, even if it's within that office setting, where you can go into your office and close your door, where some professors have gone to extremes of turning on email forwarding so that they can't even receive messages that they would be tempted to read during those times. But find a way to seclude yourself. If you work at home, create a space in your home where you can actually focus and you can get things done without distraction. So maybe there's a corner of your home that's very serene and calm for you. Maybe that becomes your workspace, but it has to be secluded at least from the noise or the distractions that can go on around you. So you're now actually setting up your environment, your physical environment, to remove distractions and actually be conducive to entering that state of deep work. And then you need to actually get to work and focus for an extended period of time. Now, there is an app on your phone called Be Focused that I find very helpful for these situations. And you can actually set a timer, a working timer for the amount of time that you want to spend going through an activity. And that can keep you on track. So now if you've turned off all your notifications, if you're on Do Not Disturb, you can run this app safely in the background. And you can use it as a work timer, and you can see that time ticking away, and it will build in breaks. And so it's okay to take breaks where you let your mind rest, for example, but we don't want to take a break to shift focus or start working on something else. So sometimes just having that timer in the background where you know you're on some type of time crunch, and that's a good strategy in general where you set deadlines for pieces of what you're working on. So if you're working on writing a novel, for example, you want to set deadlines for, okay, I'm going to get this section done by this time or this chapter done by this time. And so now you're nudging yourself along as you're in that state of deep work, as you're diving into those details, as you're getting that creative process done, and creating those little benchmarks or those markers to measure your progress can be helpful there. But the key here, right now that we understand how important it is, how critical it is to have uninterrupted, undistracted work time, to enter that creative process, we cannot be in an environment where we're distracted. We need to find a way to seclude ourselves. We need to find that place that we can go to. Even if it is a crowded area, you can put on noise-canceling headphones. You can put on white noise. If there's a coffee shop nearby in your neighborhood that is peaceful to you or that you feel productive in, go there, tune out the outside world, put the headphones on, just get to work and bury your head. That's totally fine. Especially if you live in a big city, coffee shops can be great because nobody really cares what anybody else is doing. Everybody's kind of in their own zone anyways. And so you can use that as a place to tune out and focus. But find your work environment where you can be productive, where you can be undistracted by what's going on around you. Put those distractions away, turn off those notifications, separate yourself from that connectivity, because just like it can negatively affect our relationships, as we've discussed, it can negatively affect our ability to actually focus and enter that creative process as we're constantly shifting gears from the task that we're working on to the text that we got, the email that we got, the notification from the app that just popped up. And those studies have shown that anytime that distraction happens, anytime our attention is pulled away, when we go back to what we were working on, we are less effective and less productive